I am Sarah Miller, 40, and literally last weekend my reputation as the family glue? Yeah, it totally backfired. The piece I'd been desperately holding together, quietly juggling every family drama and smoothing out all the rough edges to make things look perfect, it blew up into a full-on family meltdown at our so-called happy reunion. My older sister Beverly, yes, the Beverly who's always the loudest and the most opinionated, straight up demanded I pick her side in yet another petty feud with our younger brother, Wade. And when I clapped back for the first time ever, the room went dead silent. "You just ruined everything," Beverly yelled, her finger pointed squarely at my face, her voice echoing through my parents' ridiculously ornate dining room as every eye turned toward me. I could feel my cheeks burn, and my heart pounding so loudly I swore everyone could hear it. Beverly's husband Todd gave me that smug, half-suppressed smirk, the one he always used when he knew drama was brewing. My parents exchanged a look that said everything: disappointment, judgment, and embarrassment. But here's the tea. Their shade didn't break me. It lit a spark. In that instant, all the pressure I'd quietly endured, all the petty demands I'd obediently catered to for decades, they didn't weigh me down anymore. Something snapped in me, and I knew right then that I wasn't just pushing back, I was about to flip the script and change everything. But let's back up for a second, because this wasn't an isolated incident. My entire life had been building up to this explosion. See, in our family, everyone had a neat little box. Beverly, the golden child turned PTA president; Wade, the charming entrepreneur who somehow managed to skate through life on charisma alone; and me, Sarah, the reliable, forgettable middle child, whose role was always to make things better, fix what others broke, and above all, never complain. I was the invisible glue that kept everyone else's glittering facades from falling apart. And honestly, I was good at it. Too good. Whether it was smoothing over Mom's constant disapproval of Wade's questionable girlfriends, or calming Dad's perpetual outrage over Beverly's latest spending spree, I handled it all, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. My own accomplishments? Completely overshadowed, ignored, and dismissed every single time. But last weekend's family dinner wasn't just the straw that broke the camel's back, it set the entire haystack ablaze. Beverly's tantrum, Wade's knowing smirk, my parents' silent disapproval, they weren't new, but this time was different. This time I didn't cave. I didn't scramble to soothe their hurt feelings or desperately repair the peace they'd shattered. Instead, I stood tall, swallowed the lump of anxiety lodged deep in my throat, and decided enough was enough. So now, here I am. Still reeling, but somehow feeling more alive than I have in years. I'm sharing my story with you because what happened next was nothing short of unbelievable. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost... you wouldn't believe what they'll do once I finally put myself first. This wasn't exactly new territory. Being invisible had always been my default mode within the Miller family. Every memory I have of growing up seems tinted with a dull shade of invisibility, like my life had been carefully set to the lowest brightness so that Beverly and Wade could shine more vividly. I learned to exist quietly, silently, celebrating my victories in solitude, since no one else would. I remember when I won the state science fair at 15. While I was bubbling with excitement, holding the ribbon and certificate tightly against my chest as I rushed home, I was greeted not by cheers, but by Beverly sobbing dramatically on the living room sofa. She'd lost out on being homecoming queen by 3 votes, 3 whole votes, and you'd think the world had ended. Mom hovered beside her, cooing reassurances, while Dad paced anxiously, discussing ways to correct the injustice. My moment vanished. Instead of congratulations, I got a distracted nod from Mom and a brief, dismissive pat on the shoulder from Dad. "Sarah, maybe keep your award upstairs for now, honey," Mom had whispered, her eyes never leaving Beverly's tear-streaked face. "You understand, don't you?" And of course, I nodded. I understood far too well. Fast forward to Wade launching his first business venture, a taco food truck that, despite having zero culinary skills, quickly became a trendy local spot. My parents threw a lavish backyard celebration complete with champagne toasts and hired photographers. Wade was hailed as a visionary, an entrepreneur, the family's great hope. The entire neighborhood buzzed with admiration. Meanwhile, my quiet milestones went unnoticed. Graduating college early? A quick nod of approval at dinner. My first apartment on my own? Dad complained about it being in the wrong neighborhood. My promotion at work? Mom half listened before changing the topic back to Beverly's kids and their latest athletic achievements. Every accomplishment faded into the background, constantly overshadowed by my siblings' more visible, socially applauded successes. I learned that being quiet meant survival. Making noise, even in triumph, only seemed to invite painful indifference. Yet, ironically, this invisibility gave me space to pursue what truly mattered without interference. When I began quietly exploring wellness, meditation, and emotional health, seeking ways to heal my wounds, I quickly realized I'd stumbled onto something powerful. Something that changed me profoundly, giving me an inner confidence I'd never felt before. Yet, as always, I kept this transformation hidden from my family, carefully nurturing it in private, fearing their judgment or dismissal. I was so conditioned to keep my light dimmed that the very thought of shining too brightly felt almost dangerous. But here's the thing about invisibility. It can breed determination. Quietly, steadily, I grew stronger. I realized I didn't need their validation to recognize my worth. And even though last weekend's dinner drama threw gasoline onto the flame, this fire had been smoldering for years, patiently waiting for the right moment to explode. Now, looking back, those countless moments of being unseen weren't just painful, they were training. I'd unknowingly learned resilience, patience, and inner strength through years of silent endurance. Those years prepared me for what came next, the extraordinary secret I'd quietly built, ready to disrupt everything my family thought they knew about me. The secret I built didn't start with some flashy revelation. It began quietly, in a cramped apartment, late one night when I couldn't sleep. Frustration had led me to my breaking point. I was exhausted from always putting myself last. Every interaction with my family drained me, leaving me feeling unseen, unheard, and insignificant. But that sleepless night sparked an idea that changed everything. Scrolling aimlessly on my phone, desperate for distraction, I stumbled upon an article about emotional resilience, meditation, and boundaries. Reading it felt like someone had opened a window into my life and let fresh air pour in. Something clicked into place, and before I knew it, I was diving deep into the world of mindfulness, wellness, and emotional healing. I'd never felt such clarity. At first, I kept it to myself, worried that sharing it would only earn me dismissive eye rolls and skeptical glances from my family. Beverly would mock it as new age nonsense, Wade would shrug it off with his usual smug grin, and Mom and Dad would sigh in disappointment that I'd become even stranger. So instead, I poured all my passion into a quiet side project. I began sketching ideas, drafting notes, and carefully mapping out plans for an app designed to guide people like me, those trapped by emotional demands, manipulation, and family toxicity, towards healing and inner strength. Working on it became my refuge, a secret sanctuary. Each night after work I'd tuck myself away, hunched over my laptop, fingers tapping furiously, building something meaningful piece by piece. I didn't tell a single soul, not even my closest friends at first. It felt sacred, something precious I needed to protect. Months passed, and soon I realized my humble passion project had grown far beyond my initial dreams. Before long, I needed help, developers, wellness experts, even therapists. Each new step terrified me, yet each risk I took paid off in unexpected ways. My quiet little project evolved into a full-blown business, a thriving wellness app named Boundless, quietly transforming lives. Within 2 years, the app had a community numbering in the hundreds of thousands, resonating deeply with people seeking emotional liberation. Testimonials flooded in, users sharing how they'd finally found the courage to set boundaries, confront toxic relationships, and prioritize their own emotional health. Every story felt personal to me. Every success was a quiet triumph. Validation that my vision was real, powerful, and needed. Despite all the growth, I kept it hidden from my family. I didn't want their approval anymore, nor did I crave their acknowledgement. But I also wasn't ready to face their predictable judgment or attempts to diminish what I had created. Boundless was mine, a source of strength I wasn't willing to risk losing. Then came the moment I least expected. A prestigious tech firm expressed interest in acquiring Boundless for millions. My humble app, born out of quiet pain and solitude, had become something extraordinary. The validation was staggering, yet, as I stood on the brink of this life-changing deal, the familiar dread crept back in. The annual family dinner loomed, casting a shadow over my joy. For years, these dinners had been emotional minefields, and this one promised to be no different. Little did I know, this particular gathering would be more explosive, more painful, yet ultimately more liberating than any before it. On the eve of judgment, the night of the annual Miller family dinner, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, carefully smoothing my dress and mentally preparing for what felt like an inevitable emotional battle. I stared at my reflection, searching for signs of weakness, vulnerability, anything they might exploit. My heart tightened in my chest, nerves fluttering like anxious butterflies. After all this time, I still felt like that anxious teenager preparing to be invisible once again. The timing couldn't have been more surreal. My lawyers and financial advisors had spent the afternoon finalizing the details of Boundless's multi-million-dollar acquisition. Tomorrow morning my life would change forever. But tonight, I had to survive the gauntlet of judgment, mockery, and passive aggression disguised as family bonding. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that tonight didn't define me. I'd come too far to be shattered by their opinions, but old habits died hard. Years of quiet invisibility still echoed deep within me, stirring anxiety in the pit of my stomach. It was impossible not to feel defensive, knowing that every accomplishment I had ever quietly achieved would be dismissed the moment I walked through that door. Driving to my parents' house, the familiar dread intensified. Each turn of the wheel brought a fresh wave of memories, the dismissals, the silences, Beverly's cutting remarks, Wade's careless indifference. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to stay calm. Tonight wasn't about seeking their approval, it was about finally standing my ground. As I arrived, the family home loomed larger than ever, an imposing monument to a lifetime of emotional struggle. Lights twinkled invitingly in the windows, a picture-perfect facade masking years of hidden dysfunction. Taking one last deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped onto the driveway. Inside, the scene was deceptively normal. Mom fussing over the extravagant dinner arrangement, Dad carefully decanting expensive wine, Beverly and Todd loudly discussing their recent luxury vacation, Wade charming everyone effortlessly. My presence went unnoticed at first, invisible yet again, a ghost at my own family's gathering. "Sarah," Mom finally acknowledged me, her tone coolly distant. "We weren't sure you'd make it." She hugged me briefly, mechanically, as if touching me were an obligation rather than an act of warmth. Dad barely glanced up, already returning his attention to Wade's latest exaggerated business story. Beverly gave me a critical once-over, eyes narrowing in judgment. "Interesting dress," she offered, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I admire your bravery." I swallowed my irritation, reminding myself to stay calm, but it wasn't easy. Todd smirked knowingly, sensing the tension, and Wade laughed dismissively, oblivious to the hurt swirling beneath my composed exterior. Sitting down at the table felt like entering a boxing ring. I braced myself as Mom started her predictable questioning about my career, subtly implying it was less valuable compared to Beverly's parenting triumphs or Wade's entrepreneurial charisma. My answers were politely dismissed, every achievement subtly diminished. Yet tonight felt different. Beneath the anxiety and humiliation, something within me had shifted, quietly powerful, unwavering, resilient. Tonight wasn't simply about enduring their contempt. Tonight was about silently preparing to reclaim myself, regardless of their verdict. Little did they know, the fragile, invisible Sarah they'd always dismissed no longer existed. And soon, very soon, they'd realize exactly how wrong they'd been. From the moment dinner began, it was clear that tonight would test every ounce of my self-control. Beverly wasted no time launching into her favorite game, subtle ridicule disguised as sisterly concern. "So Sarah," Beverly began sweetly, carefully cutting into her perfectly cooked salmon, "are you still into that mindfulness stuff? Or have you moved on to crystals and incense now?" She giggled lightly, clearly amused with herself, while Todd chuckled appreciatively beside her. I felt my jaw tighten involuntarily, but I forced myself to remain composed. I wasn't going to let her bait me. Not tonight. "Actually," I replied calmly, maintaining eye contact, "mindfulness is about emotional health, You'd be surprised how beneficial it is, even for skeptics. The table quieted briefly, surprised by my quiet confidence. Wade raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly, steering the conversation away. Beverly's eyes flashed, annoyed I'd brushed off her dig so easily. Mom chimed in next, carefully masking her disapproval with politeness. Well, I suppose it's nice to have hobbies, but Beverly tells me you're still single, dear. Don't you think it's time you settled down? You're 40 after all. Her smile was saccharine, a thin veil barely covering her true meaning. My choices had left me inadequate in her eyes. Beverly smirked triumphantly, leaning forward to hear my response. My cheeks warmed slightly, humiliation rising, but I quickly steadied myself. Years of enduring this familiar gauntlet had taught me restraint, even if it stung every single time. Actually, Mom, I replied firmly, I find fulfillment in my career and friendships. I've learned happiness doesn't require a traditional path. Mom's smile faltered slightly, her carefully maintained mask slipping for just a second. Beverly's lips tightened with irritation. Todd cleared his throat, glancing nervously between Beverly and me. Wade chimed in lazily, ever the charming observer. Well, at least Sarah's consistent. Never worried about impressing anyone but herself. His comment landed softly yet carried a hidden blade. Wade had perfected the art of subtle dismissal, cloaked in a thin layer of amusement. The table chuckled, though no one laughed louder than Beverly, her eyes glittering with smug satisfaction. Despite the tightness in my chest, I refused to crumble. I reminded myself that their validation no longer defined me. Still, each passive-aggressive jab was exhausting, chipping away at my patience like tiny cracks forming in fragile porcelain. As dessert arrived, a towering chocolate cake Mom proudly declared she'd made specially for Beverly, I felt a pang of nostalgia. I'd always been the one to bake with her as a child, the helper, quietly working in the shadows while Beverly basked in praise. Mom sliced the cake, serving Beverly first, followed by Todd, Wade, Dad and herself. When she finally handed me a piece, it felt like an afterthought. So generous, Beverly teased lightly, giving Sarah such a big slice. Clearly you think she needs a little comfort. Her thinly veiled criticism of my weight hit harder than I expected, stealing the breath from my lungs. Humiliation burned my cheeks again, my appetite instantly lost, but as I stared at the untouched cake, something hardened inside me. This wasn't new, this was our pattern. Their cruelty masked as jokes, their disdain hidden behind smiles. I'd endured this gauntlet my entire life. Yet, in this bitter moment, clarity finally came. I was done with this. No more quietly absorbing their cruelty, no more smiling through humiliation. Tonight, everything would change, even if they didn't know it yet. The air grew heavier as Mom gently tapped her wineglass, silencing the murmur of side conversations. An uneasy hush settled over the dining room and I felt a strange chill snake down my spine. This wasn't part of our usual script. Something felt off, almost ceremonial. Beverly exchanged a knowing glance with Todd, while Wade leaned back in his chair, clearly anticipating some form of drama. My mother's voice broke the silence, smooth and carefully controlled. We need to discuss something important as a family. It's never easy to say, but it's necessary. My pulse quickened, dread pooling in my stomach. I glanced nervously at Beverly, who wore a barely concealed smile, a hint of triumph glittering in her eyes. Dad sat rigidly, avoiding eye contact. Every instinct told me to brace myself for impact. Sarah, Mom continued evenly, her voice steady yet distant, we feel you've drifted too far from what matters to us as a family. Your choices, your lifestyle, this focus on yourself, it's created a distance we simply can't overlook. I felt the room start to spin, blood roaring in my ears. This wasn't just criticism. This was deliberate rejection, a line clearly being drawn. Beverly took over seamlessly, relishing the moment. We've talked it over, Sarah. Honestly, your priorities are just so selfish. It's always about you and your little mindfulness journey, isn't it? You're never there when we need you. Her accusation pierced deeply, cutting through the stunned silence. My throat tightened painfully, rendering me speechless. Dad finally spoke, voice gruff, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. We've made a decision. As of tonight, you're no longer part of this family. You've made your choice. We've made ours. The bluntness of his words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I sat frozen, desperately searching their faces for some sign of hesitation or regret. but all I saw was cold resolve, masked beneath careful expressions. Beverly smirked openly now, savoring every second. Wade shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed firmly on his plate, choosing detachment as always. You can't be serious," I finally managed, my voice barely audible. Beverly's laughter filled the silence, brittle and mocking. "Oh, we're serious, Sarah. You've spent years quietly judging us, pretending you're better because you're so enlightened. Well, now you can do it alone." Mom looked away, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. Dad stared straight ahead, unmoving, expressionless. My siblings offered nothing, no support, no protest. I had become completely disposable, exiled by the family I'd devoted myself to preserving for decades. Pain flooded through me, raw and overwhelming, washing away years of careful composure. Tears blurred my vision, and humiliation burned hotter than ever before. Yet, even as my heart shattered, a surprising clarity emerged. The cruelty of their rejection was absolute, but in its brutality it revealed the truth I'd long denied. I'd never truly belonged here. Suddenly, the tension was shattered by the urgent buzzing of my phone vibrating against the polished wood of the table. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then numbly glanced down. An unknown number flashed insistently across the screen. Beverly scoffed impatiently. "Typical. Can't you even respect this moment?" Without responding, I lifted the phone, desperate for any escape from this nightmare. Little did I know that single call was about to flip the entire script, revealing the strength they never knew I had, and a success beyond anything they could ever dismiss again. I answered the call with trembling hands, my heart pounding so loudly that I barely heard the voice on the other end. "Hello, Sarah Miller speaking," I whispered, struggling to regain composure, aware of my family's irritated glares burning holes into me. "Sarah, hi. This is Alicia Montgomery, Chief Acquisitions Officer at Vitaltech Ventures. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I just couldn't wait until morning to share the news." Her voice was bright, brimming with excitement, such a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere at the dinner table that I had to steady myself, gripping the phone tighter. "Is everything okay?" I managed, voice quivering slightly. "More than okay. Sarah, the board just approved the final offer to acquire Boundless. It's official. We're closing at $22 million. Congratulations, you've created something truly remarkable." The words echoed through my mind, stunning me into silence. For a moment the room seemed to shrink, fading away as my entire life shifted. Every late night spent building Boundless, every moment of quiet perseverance, every dismissal from my family, it all crystallized into this breathtaking validation. "Sarah, are you still there?" Alicia prompted gently. Thank you, Alicia," I finally choked out, my voice shaking with disbelief and sudden joy. "This is incredible." "Well, you deserve it. We'll talk details tomorrow, but tonight, celebrate. You earned every penny." I hung up slowly, heart hammering in my chest, the enormity of what had just happened still washing over me. I lifted my gaze, meeting the eyes of my family who'd clearly overheard every word. Their faces were priceless, utter shock blended with disbelief, confusion, and an unmistakable flash of envy from Beverly. Mom's carefully cultivated expression cracked, mouth hanging slightly open. Dad stared in stunned silence. Wade was the first to find his voice, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Sarah, what was that about?" Before I could respond, Beverly interjected sharply, her voice edged with suspicion. $22 million? For what exactly?" "My app," I replied softly, allowing the magnitude of this moment to fill me with quiet strength. "Boundless, the mindfulness journey you mocked, turns out it's worth a lot more than your ridicule." The weight of the moment was electrifying. For once, I held their full attention, not as the quiet, invisible Sarah they'd dismissed, but as someone whose success was impossible to deny. "Well," Mom began uncertainly, trying to mask her sudden discomfort with forced enthusiasm, "that's wonderful news, dear. Perhaps we spoke a little hastily." Dad coughed awkwardly, eyes darting nervously toward Beverly, silently questioning their earlier decision. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, steadying my trembling nerves. Their attempts at backtracking, the transparent scramble to regain control, it no longer affected me. Their power had been shattered with that single phone call. "You just disowned me," I stated calmly, firmly. Suddenly reconsidering because of money seems hypocritical, doesn't it? The table fell silent again, every pair of eyes wide with astonishment at my boldness. Beverly's cheeks flushed red, embarrassment mixing with anger. Wade shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could vanish. Mom's expression turned pleading, desperately attempting to salvage the evening. But it was too late. For the first time in my life, I stood entirely on my own terms. Their approval or rejection meant nothing compared to the deep, undeniable validation I had found within myself. Quietly, confidently, I rose from the table. "I'm done," I said, voice steady and resolute. "This dinner, this charade, I won't play along anymore." And just like that, I walked away from their stunned silence, finally free. Behind me, the dining room erupted into chaos. Beverly's voice rose sharply, demanding I return, while Mom's tone turned frantic, pleading with me to reconsider. Wade muttered something dismissive, retreating emotionally as always, while Dad's voice strained to regain authority, calling after me in stern desperation. Yet, I kept walking, each step more liberating than the last. My heart pounded with exhilaration and relief. For years I'd imagined this moment, finally drawing a firm line, rejecting their manipulation and hypocrisy. But imagining and living it were two vastly different experiences. It felt surreal, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. Reaching the front door, I paused briefly, gathering my resolve as footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see Beverly charging down the hallway, eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and panic. Her carefully controlled facade had completely shattered. "Sarah, stop being so dramatic," she snapped, voice trembling with anger. "Come back and sit down, let's talk rationally." I stared at her steadily, calm washing over me. "Rationally? You mean now that I've suddenly become valuable to you? The only drama tonight is yours, Beverly." She flinched visibly, anger flashing hotter in her eyes. "You're throwing away your family, over what, some stupid app?" I shook my head, pity mixing with newfound confidence. "No, I'm walking away because I finally see this family clearly. You disowned me moments ago, remember? The only thing that changed is you discovered my worth. But I've known my value all along. Sarah," she sputtered, voice shaking, suddenly vulnerable. "You can't just leave. We're your family." I felt a pang of sadness beneath the triumph. Even now, she still couldn't grasp what family truly meant. "Family supports Beverly. Family doesn't tear each other down. You've always mistaken control for care." The hurt flickered across her face briefly, replaced almost immediately by cold bitterness. "Fine. Walk away, but don't expect sympathy when it all comes crashing down." I smiled softly, genuinely unmoved by her threat. "It's already crashed, Beverly, and I'm finally free." With that, I stepped out into the cool night air, closing the door firmly behind me, shutting out decades of toxicity and emotional manipulation. The cool breeze brushed gently against my skin, soothing the heat of my flushed cheeks. The world outside felt suddenly larger, filled with possibility rather than suffocating expectation. I took a deep breath, savoring this new sensation of freedom. The weight I'd carried for years lifted entirely, leaving behind a sense of profound relief, mixed with quiet determination. For the first time, my future stretched openly before me, unburdened by the constant need for validation, free of emotional traps. My phone buzzed again, this time with supportive texts from close friends who'd sensed tonight might be difficult. Their words of comfort and excitement replaced the sting of family betrayal with a warm reminder that chosen family existed. That love, support, and validation weren't limited to blood. Getting into my car, I glanced briefly back at the house. Through the window, silhouettes moved frantically, arguments undoubtedly still echoing through the hallways. But for once, their chaos wasn't mine to fix or endure. I started the engine, driving away from the past toward a life I'd quietly built for myself, one rooted in authenticity, purpose, and self-worth. My quiet rebellion had finally bloomed into unapologetic self-respect, more powerful than revenge or resentment. Tonight wasn't merely about walking away. It was about stepping forward into a new chapter entirely on my terms. The drive away from my family home felt surreal, like stepping out of a dark tunnel and into open, expansive sunlight. The city lights blurred past, each mile putting greater distance between me and years of emotional confinement. I drove instinctively to one place where I knew comfort awaited me, my best friend Corinne's cozy townhouse. Corinne opened the door before I could even knock, her expression filled with empathy and warmth. She'd clearly sensed something had gone wrong. Without a word, she pulled me into a tight embrace, the kind of hug that quietly reassures you that you're safe, seen, and truly loved. Inside, her living room was softly lit by flickering candles and the comforting glow of familiar lamps. Our mutual friends Joanna and Elise were already gathered, their faces showing immediate concern mixed with curiosity. These women were my chosen family, the sisters I'd always wished for, quietly supportive, fiercely loyal, never demanding. Corinne guided me gently to the sofa, sitting closely beside me. "Okay, Sarah," she said softly, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Tell us everything, or just sit and breathe, whatever you need." For a moment, I couldn't find words. Emotions surged suddenly to the surface. Relief, sadness, triumph, grief, all tangled together in my chest. Tears welled unexpectedly, and I finally allowed them to fall, unashamed in their presence. Joanna handed me a box of tissues without a word, her eyes gentle. Elise simply placed her hand reassuringly on my shoulder. None of them rushed me. They quietly held space, understanding that healing often required silence first. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled softly. They disowned me. Officially, completely, at dinner. They said I was selfish, too different, not aligned with their values. Corinne sighed deeply, squeezing my hand gently. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, you didn't deserve any of this." I nodded, absorbing her support gratefully. And then, right in the middle of it, the call came. My app, Boundless. It sold for millions. Suddenly they wanted me back as if nothing had happened. The shock and excitement on their faces lifted my spirits instantly, each friend immediately shifting from sympathy to genuine joy. "Are you serious?" Elise exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. "Sarah, that's incredible. We knew you were working hard. But millions?" Joanna interrupted, her smile radiant. "Oh, that's amazing. You deserve this success more than anyone." Corinne's face softened with pride. "You've worked quietly, relentlessly, always underestimated. But look at you now, you're finally getting the recognition you deserve." Their enthusiasm warmed me deeply, reinforcing the stark contrast between their genuine support and my family's self-serving hypocrisy. Here was true family, a bond created by choice, not by obligation or expectation. For the first time in years, I felt completely understood. Corinne raised her glass of wine in a toast, eyes sparkling with joyful tears. To Sarah, who quietly built an empire, reclaimed her worth, and finally put herself first, "We are so proud of you." Their glasses clinked together, laughter filling the room, chasing away the shadows of rejection. In that moment, the painful sting of the evening faded, replaced by gratitude for these remarkable women who loved me unconditionally. Later, as we curled up comfortably on the sofa, surrounded by warmth and gentle chatter, I realized this was the family I'd always longed for, one built on respect, support, and genuine love. My biological family might have cut ties tonight, but the bonds of chosen family had grown immeasurably stronger. As I relaxed into the comforting embrace of friendship, I knew I'd never truly be alone again. In the weeks following the dinner that changed everything, the predictable attempts at reconciliation from my family began trickling in. Beverly sent carefully crafted messages disguised as concern. Mom left hesitant voicemails suggesting we talk things through. And Dad awkwardly emailed a terse yet unmistakably apologetic note. Even Wade sent a text, characteristically vague, but clearly intended as a cautious olive branch. Yet, despite their overtures, I felt no temptation to slip back into old patterns. Boundaries, a concept I'd spent years quietly studying and teaching through Boundless, had suddenly become profoundly real. For the first time in my life, I wasn't merely advocating them for others, I was fiercely implementing them for myself. The clarity I'd found that evening became my North Star. I quickly realized I had a responsibility, not only to myself, but also to those who looked to my journey for guidance, to honor these newfound limits. When Mom called one afternoon, her voice hesitant, carefully neutral, I calmly interrupted before she could launch into her familiar pattern of guilt-laden manipulation. "Mom, I appreciate your call," I said firmly, gently. "But we both know nothing meaningful has changed. Boundaries mean respecting choices, even when they don't align with your expectations. I won't compromise my well-being to fit into the family mold anymore." Her stunned silence confirmed how unfamiliar this version of me was to her. Eventually, she spoke softly, her voice small. "But Sarah, we're your family." I sighed deeply, my tone gentle yet unwavering. Family means respect, acceptance, and unconditional support, not demands disguised as love. If you ever truly understand that, maybe we can have a relationship. Until then, I need distance. Each conversation that followed, each carefully crafted message I sent in response to their attempts at reconciliation, strengthened my resolve. I felt no malice or bitterness, only the calm, steady certainty of someone who finally understood her worth. Meanwhile, Boundless's acquisition propelled me into a whirlwind of public attention. Suddenly, I was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by prestigious media outlets, and featured prominently as an entrepreneur who had quietly revolutionized emotional wellness. Ironically, the same traits my family dismissed, my quiet resilience, emotional intelligence, and authenticity, became celebrated strengths, inspiring countless others. My chosen family supported me fiercely through every step. Corinne, Joanna, and Elise became my inner circle of grounding comfort, reminding me daily that boundaries were my armor and authenticity was my superpower. One evening, Corinne gently observed, "Sarah, you know you've changed the way so many people understand family dynamics, right? You're teaching them something crucial. It's okay to choose yourself." Her words resonated deeply. I'd spent years advocating quietly for others to set boundaries, yet had struggled to do the same for myself. Now, standing firmly in my own truth felt transformative, not only for me but for those who saw their stories mirrored in mine. The more I established clear lines, communicating my expectations calmly and respectfully, the stronger I felt. Boundaries weren't walls meant to isolate, they were protective spaces within which I could thrive authentically, free from emotional manipulation. My family's resistance eventually quieted, replaced by reluctant acceptance. They finally understood. The old Sarah, quietly suffering their demands, no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone unapologetically committed to her emotional health and genuine happiness. As I stood confidently in the fortress of boundaries I'd carefully constructed, I realized their respect, or lack thereof, no longer dictated my self-worth. My strength came from within, built slowly, quietly, until it became unshakable, and that realization was the truest freedom I'd ever known. With newfound strength and clarity, I poured my energy into reclaiming my legacy, not as the obedient daughter who quietly endured, but as a woman who boldly transformed pain into purpose. Boundless's acquisition had given me more than financial independence. It provided an opportunity to redefine what the Miller name meant. Choosing to embrace this moment openly, I established the Miller Resilience Foundation, dedicating resources to mental health awareness, emotional healing, and boundary-setting education. It was deeply personal, grounded firmly in my own experiences, yet widely accessible to countless others facing similar struggles. The foundation's launch became a turning point. Standing before an audience filled with supportive faces, my chosen family, colleagues, and grateful users of Boundless, I finally felt fully visible, fully seen. This foundation, I announced softly, steadily, was born from personal pain and quiet resilience. For too long I silently carried emotional burdens I had no business bearing, believing self-sacrifice was my duty. Today, I stand before you knowing that's not strength, it's unnecessary suffering. True strength is found in self-respect, in the quiet courage to establish boundaries and choose yourself. The applause that followed filled me with quiet pride. My voice, once timidly hidden, now resonated deeply, authentically. No longer seeking external validation, I had finally reclaimed the Miller name on my own terms, transforming it from one rooted in emotional toxicity to one symbolizing strength, healing, and empowerment. Media coverage quickly amplified our message. Interviews and speaking engagements poured in, providing platforms to share openly about emotional health and the importance of setting healthy boundaries. Each opportunity further strengthened my resolve, affirming my journey was not only valid but necessary. In the midst of this whirlwind, an unexpected email arrived late one evening. Beverly's name flashed across my inbox, prompting familiar dread. Yet, this time, curiosity outweighed anxiety. Opening it cautiously, I found a surprising note, hesitant but genuine. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted to tell you that despite everything, I admire your courage. Watching you stand firm and reclaim yourself forced me to rethink a lot of things, especially how our family operates. I'm not proud of how I treated you. Maybe one day, we can talk properly. Until then, Please know I'm genuinely sorry. I reread her words several times, absorbing their quiet power. The apology didn't erase years of pain, nor did it repair the damage instantly, but it was a meaningful start, a crack in the rigid wall of denial and pride that had defined our relationship for too long. Carefully, I typed a brief reply. Thank you, Beverly. It means a lot. Change is hard but necessary. When we're both ready, let's talk. Sending it felt oddly peaceful. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't weakness, it was liberation. Establishing boundaries didn't mean shutting doors permanently, it simply meant deciding consciously when or if to open them again. As the foundation flourished, letters and messages flooded in from people inspired by my journey. Stories of quiet strength, courageous boundary setting, and reclaimed self-worth filled my inbox daily. Each one reinforced my conviction that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was profoundly powerful. One evening, as I sat quietly reflecting in my new office overlooking the city lights, I realized my legacy had shifted entirely. I'd spent years quietly carrying the burden of invisibility, silently absorbing others' emotional demands. Now my legacy wasn't one of suffering, it was one of healing, empowerment, and authentic self-respect. I smiled gently, embracing the knowledge that I'd finally rewritten my story. The Miller name no longer felt heavy or burdensome. Instead, it represented quiet courage, inner strength, and boundless possibilities. And that, perhaps, was my greatest victory of all. It was late evening, and the city lights twinkled gently beyond the window of my apartment. Sitting comfortably in my favorite chair, wrapped in a soft blanket, I allowed myself to reflect on how profoundly my life had transformed since that explosive dinner. The silence around me felt peaceful rather than lonely, a soothing reminder of how much had changed, not just externally, but deeply within. There had been a time when I'd spent countless nights replaying interactions with my family, tortured by thoughts of what I could have done differently to win their approval. I used to chase their validation relentlessly, convinced their acceptance would finally heal my hidden wounds. But tonight, as I sat quietly sipping tea, I realized that the peace I now felt came not from their acknowledgement, but from my own self-validation. True healing hadn't come from forcing others to see my worth. It came from learning to recognize and honor my own value. The boundaries I'd created weren't just about protecting myself from emotional harm. They had quietly carved out space for genuine self-respect, something I'd lacked for too long. My phone buzzed softly, and glancing down, I smiled at a text from Corinne. Hey, just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've inspired so many, including me. Love you, Sarah. Warmth filled me, the simple sincerity of her message reinforcing that validation could be authentic, kind, and unconditional. My chosen family had quietly shown me what healthy love truly meant. Closing my eyes briefly, I took a deep breath, savoring the calm that now filled my heart. For decades, I'd been invisible to the people who should have cherished me most. Yet here I was, stronger and more fulfilled than ever, not because I'd changed their minds, but because I'd changed mine. The realization settled deeply, soothing old wounds I once believed would never heal. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or gaining revenge. The victory I'd found was infinitely more meaningful. Discovering that my worth had always been intrinsic, quietly waiting for me to claim it. Reflecting further, I thought about how far-reaching my quiet revolution had become. Boundless continued to thrive under new leadership, reaching millions of people struggling to find emotional resilience and inner peace. The Miller Resilience Foundation was thriving, positively changing lives every day. But most importantly, I had changed. My story had not only empowered others, but had transformed my own self-image completely. There was no anger left, no bitterness toward my family, only quiet gratitude for the lessons learned, even the painful ones. Those experiences had molded me into someone who could face rejection head-on, turn suffering into strength, and redefine legacy with purpose and authenticity. I set my cup down gently, gazing thoughtfully at the city skyline. Tomorrow held endless possibilities. Each day another opportunity to reinforce the boundaries that kept me emotionally healthy, respected, and strong. My journey had taught me the profound truth that self-validation was the greatest peace anyone could achieve. And finally, sitting here alone but content, I felt deeply, powerfully whole. I had reclaimed myself, not by force or defiance, but by quietly choosing to honor my own worth above anyone else's judgment. In this realization, I found true peace. It wasn't fleeting or fragile. It was quiet, steady, unbreakable, and it had always belonged to me. Have you ever found yourself trapped in the expectations of others, silently compromising your own happiness for the sake of approval? I'd love to hear your story. Share your experience in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Remember, boundaries aren't walls meant to isolate us. They're the lines we draw to protect our emotional health, dignity, and self-worth. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. You have the strength within you to reclaim your powers and discover genuine peace and validation. Ask yourself, have I truly honored my own worth? Reflect deeply. Where can I set boundaries to protect my peace? Share courageously. Let's support each other in choosing authenticity. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, you're never alone, and your worth was never in question. It was always yours to claim.